Okay, we'll follow the handout. Mainly, I'll tell you where we are in sources when you need to know. Those of you on the recording live or listening to the recording later can still follow along even without the handout. As always, I'd like to begin this incredible day by framing the day, by giving us an understanding of what this day is all about. And I think it's fair to say in a very interesting way that this could be the most powerful day on our calendar year. And it's crazy to say that at first hearing because we have Yom Kippur. We have the great Day of Atonement. We have a day that's decreed by God, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And it's a day from the Torah. It's a day of full atonement for every member of Am Yisrael. This is a rabbinical day. This is a fast that is decreed by the prophets. So how is it accurate to make that statement? And I think it is because if you look at Yom Kippur is there firstly to address individuals. Every single individual in Am Yisrael has a chance for Mechila v'Chapara, full atonement and forgiveness on Yom Kippur. Even in the days of the Bet HaMikdash, where things were done on behalf of the nation, by and large, it was forgiveness for many, many individuals collectively. Yom Kippur is incredible in what it has the power to do for an individual. But it's an individual. On top of that, Yom Kippur is something that addresses the now. It doesn't grant you forgiveness forever. And we're going to have to come back around next Yom Kippur and do it all over again. It's inevitable. We're human. So you can say that Yom Kippur's power is also somewhat temporary. Comes along to Tisha B'Av. And since this became a day of tragedy, really in the desert, Hetem and Agilim was traditionally known to be on Tisha B'Av. And throughout history, and as this became, because of the destruction specifically of the first and second Bet HaMikdash, a day of tragedy, the Nevi'im has established this not only to be a day of mourning, they established this day to be a day of a potential holiday. They created a day, the prophets had the power to create a day where we have ability on this day to transform not just for now, to transform permanently, to transform not just for individuals, but for the entire nation of Am Yisrael, to change our status, to create a storm in Shamayim on a national basis, and to make this into a day of redemption. There's no other day that can be a day of redemption besides this incredible, powerful day of Tisha B'Av. And how do we do it? We do it using this incredible dual function of a day. I like to call it a superstorm. We have colliding on one hand is Avelut. There's mourning. Mourning is a passive way of observance. Mourning is, of course, mourning for the terrible, incredible amount of endless tragedy and sorrow that befell Am Yisrael, not only on this day throughout history, but throughout all days of all Jewish history, and more so, mourning for the void, the lacking of Shekhinah, the presence of God. We can't forget, we get too comfortable. We're comfortable, Baruch Hashem, in a very nice exile and diaspora we're in right now. We're going to be more comfortable. Possibly the most comfortable diaspora exile in the history of Jewish people. Can't get too comfortable. We have to keep in mind that things are right now in a disgraceful state of affairs. God is not here. The Shekhinah is not present. Things aren't the way they're supposed to be. Our existence and our objective of existence in this world is not the way it should be. Oy na'alanu, that we live in darkness. We're mourning for that. And the other aspect of this incredible day is Ta'anit Sibur, like Yom Kippur. We have a communal national fast day, and we use that in a powerful way to improve ourselves, to reflect, and thereby finding the solutions to the problem and to the issues, and giving us the potential for actual incredible redemption and to transform this day into a holiday. So that's what this day is all about. But what motivates us? In other words, it sounds good, but what's really going to push any of us, any Jew out of the, let's say, close to 15 million Jews on earth right now, to really take advantage of that incredibly powerful day? And what motivates us is going to be the first couple of sources on our source sheet. Source one, which I always bring, is the famous Yerushalmi, Masechet Yoma. That's quoted all the time, but it's so true. And that is Kol Dor she'eno nibneh bet hamikdash biyamav ma'alin alav kilu hu hechlibo. Any generation where the Bet HaMikdash was not built in its time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu considers it as if the Bet HaMikdash was destroyed in that generation. Because if we have the power to transform, if we have the power to find solutions and to make this day into a holiday and to bring redemption and to change things back, revert them back to the way they were meant to be on this earth, and it didn't happen in this generation, and it could have happened, so we might as well have been destroying it right now in our lifetimes. And we're looked at as annihilators. It's a powerful concept. And the second source, source two, is the famous Rambam, who tells us about the function of fast days, the objective of fast days. That we should fast because of the sarot, the terrible tragedies and sorrows that befell upon us, in order to inspire us and open the doors of Teshuvah. And on the second line, he says, it helps us remember our own evil doings. And likewise of our forefathers, and we've been doing the same thing they've been doing wrong for many generations. To the extent that we caused, they caused, and we caused the past and current troubles. How do we look at this concept of what could have been, what should be, bemoaning and mourning our own deeds? Let me just give you a perspective to look at this, to help us understand. Imagine that 20 years ago, we resolved all of this. 20 Shabbat ago, we did what was expected of us to do. And we turned things around. We transformed things. That means there would be, turn back the clock, 20 less years, 20 fewer years of Jewish sorrow and suffering. It means that we've already would have been 20 years in the making of having the presence of God on earth and the Bet HaMikdash existing and things the way they were meant to be. We just wasted 20 years of all of that. That's a reality. So if it's in our hands, we really have to look at this day as one in which we acknowledge our responsibility. And you can fairly ask the question, the rhetorical question, that it is in our hands. Don't we owe it to them? Don't we owe it to past generations, to all those who gave their lives al Kiddush Hashem because they believed in God and the cause in our Torah and Kedushah and Judaism? Don't we owe it to them to turn things around? To all those who committed to our Torah and Mizvot and maintained that commitment despite difficulty and oppression and persecution? We can't relate to that in our lives, but they did it. Don't we owe it to them to transform things and turn them around? To all those who endured intense suffering, those who endured the Holocaust, those who endured pogroms and expulsions, those who endured crusades and inquisitions, all the suffering, don't we owe it to them to turn things around? We must acknowledge our responsibility on this day. It's powerful, it's daunting, but it's incumbent upon us. That is the power of today. So I want to summarize really what I've been doing the past 3 years, because I've chosen over the years for the theme of my class to be the same and to be the one issue that Hachamim point out to be the issue, at least the issue for which we deserve destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, and the issue that perpetuates that exile and the lack of rebuilding that Beit HaMikdash and redemption, and that is Sinat Hinam. Because if we can focus in on the cause, there are many minor causes. We don't want to belittle things by calling them minor, but there's sub-causes. We can focus in on the main cause, then we have it made. And so the last 3 years prior to this one, that's what this class from this podium has been focusing upon. And let's just summarize, because one, there is a method behind the madness, and one segues to the next. 3 years ago, we really just defined what Sinat Hinam is, based on some thoughts from Hachamim. The idea that when someone else thinks differently, acts differently than we do, that we find that to be somewhat threatening. That we are concerned that the success of the other is a threat to us. That we believe that in order for us to be validated and for us to be correct and for us as individuals and whatever movement that we feel that we belong to be vindicated and to be shown to be the ultimate one, that others have to be belittled and others have to be proven wrong. That ultimate essence of Sinat Hinam is what perpetuates this feeling, and we never resolve it, because we always say and think and hear others say, we must stop the Sinat Hinam and have Ahavat Hinam. Well, what about him? Well, that. But, or accept, it's not acceptable. And how preposterous it is for any person or movement or denomination or faction ever to think that ours will be the one that will shine bright and rise to the top, and that's when we'll be redeemed. And how crazy it is for people that live and share the suffering of generations and live in the same exile and share cities and communities and neighborhoods to not be able to treat each other and ourselves as ahim, as brothers. Al tasna achicha bilvadecha. Not to feel that way for your brother and sister, because every single Jew is our brother and sister. And the subsequent year, in the second year, we discussed solutions. What does Ahavat mean? Why does God demand Ahavat Israel and Ahavat Ahim? Love of individuals, love of groups, love of Am Yisrael as a whole, and some ways to be able to foster that love. And last year, we really spoke very concretely about the vast majority of the Jewish people, at least in today's world. We used some statistics, and we spoke about at least 80+% of the Jewish world are not professed, observant, keeping Torah and Mitzvot Jews. And the fact that the way halakha views these Jews in a way that it makes it not their fault, and that the fingers should not be pointed at the Jews Mehalel Shabbat as much as it disgusts us, and the participants of the discotheque in Tel Aviv on Friday night as much as it is abhorrent to us, and those who are eating taref, and those who are not observing the holidays, etc., because we went through the sources last year, and basically were able, by and large, to conclude that Hachamim look at people that never had background, that didn't have the same opportunity, that didn't have that education and the benefit of the environment that we have, as by and large what's called Tinok Shenishba, the baby taken captive, and those that cannot be faulted to a great extent. There are remote and certain examples of Risha'im, but by and large, no. And that halakha basically absolves most of those people from what they're doing. And that that group that the Nevi'im have been addressing and have addressed, and Hachamim have addressed and have asked to transform and to change ways and to repent is not that 80+%. It's that possible, what I called the 17%, just based on certain possible surveys and polls and census, etc. So we'll give it that name, the 17% of professed, committed, Torah observant Jews. Those are the ones that are being addressed. Those are the ones that have to get together. Those are the ones that have to find a way to unite. And when they do, the resourcefulness and the talent, and the skills of that grouping, the observant, committed grouping of Jews, will be able to solve the over 80% without a problem in a very short period of time. A very short period of time. And that the onus is upon us. And that's what we focused on last year. And so what I'd like to focus on this year is that 17%, is that minority of committed, observant Torah and Mitzvot Jews. Look at us, talk about us, and find out how we get ourselves together. So welcome to Sinat Hainam version 4, and that is this year's class. So I'm going in a moment to give out an addendum handout to you. That's the first time in this class. Because I want to talk about and give a flavor historically and currently, the real divisions of Jewish communities, the factions within Judaism. When you speak of factions within Judaism, you can talk about what they call denominations, although we're not going to speak about that per se so much, because that would include in today's day, besides Orthodox Jewry, conservative, Reform, Reconstructionist, and secular, etc. But we're not addressing those people in this class really today. So denominations technically is not the most accurate to use, but I'll just use it in a way that we can sort of capture and frame the larger groups, Faradi, Ashkenazi, Hasidim. We'll use that term denominations for them. We'll discuss ethnic groups. Talk about ethnic groups means not an affiliation, which is what denominations are, but a background, a descendant of an area, a country, a people. And those ethnic groups throughout the course of history, talking about centuries, millennia, those ethnic groups developed in a way that's different than other ethnic groups, developed different minhagim, developed different culture within Judaism, and even different, you can say, tracks of halakha over the course of time and the development of Torah Sheba'al Peh and the oral law. And then, of course, the different philosophical approaches. So we're going to give out this this booklet, and the people on the live record or live Zoom or the recording aren't missing out on too much, because we'll describe it as we go. But let's give this out quicker. Here you go. And so it's a little bit of a history lesson, and it's also a current picture of things. And I'll, don't look through it yet. Go through it one page at a time with me. This won't be too long. But let's start with the first page. That's a homemade chart, and it's nowhere meant to be extensive and exhaustive at all. It's a basic idea. But let's just talk about how this all happened, how we've become so divided in terms of places, in terms of ways of thinking, in terms of ways of behavior. How has that happened? When the first Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, second Beit HaMikdash rather, we were mostly in Israel, and there were some Jews in Iraq, maybe a very smattering in other places of the world. And when we were expelled from Eretz Yisrael for the most part, and slowly but surely the Israel community over the next couple of centuries became smaller and shrank, and the community in Bavel, in Babylonia, in Iraq, basically grew larger and larger. And for the most part, the vast majority of the Jewish people resided in that country, in different cities in that country. So you can say, to a great extent, even a few centuries after the Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, we maintained at least physical unity. And then there was breakoffs. We know of already in the 3rd century and on, for there to be Sephardi communities that were born. We mainly mean in Spain and in other countries in North Africa. Ashkenazi communities as whole communities weren't recorded to a number of centuries later. And after the centuries in Iraq and the Jewish communities beginning to dwindle from that center of Jewish living and Jewish learning and the Torah, basically started to scatter more and into Spain and to North Africa. And you can say that in the medieval centuries, in the 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th centuries, that was a whole segment of Jews that were called Sfaradim in Spain and North African countries. And during that same time, you can go down to the Ashkenazi communities, with origin were Germany and France. Ashkenaz is what they call Germany, starting in the 10th century, and that developed over those centuries. But then as you got into the 14th and 15th centuries, expulsions from England and France, and then the Inquisition, of course, from Spain, these communities migrated for survival. The Sephardi communities migrated to different places, further to North Africa, to the Ottoman Empire, a lot of the Middle East, to Amsterdam, of course, Amsterdam, Holland. And if you can look on the chart, I just listed just a few of the countries in the Middle East, in the Ottoman Empire: Turkey, Greece, Iraq, Egypt, Syria, of course, in North Africa, Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Libya, Amsterdam, where if you were to, visit the timeline of Judaism in, let's say, the 18th century, you would find Sephardi Jews spread over all these countries and others as well. But Ashkenazi Jews who were primarily in Western Europe, medieval times, in Germany and France and Austria and Belgium, then migrated for survival purposes further Eastern Europe, Poland first and foremost, Russia, Ukraine, Hungary, Romania, and many other countries in that region. And of course, there were independent communities that were never in the prime origin of Sephardi and Ashkenazi countries, like the Italian community from the destruction of the second Beit HaMikdash, the Yemenite community, the Persian community, which is Iran today, all existing all along. So this picture is the way Judaism looked for many centuries. These are denominations, you can say, Sephardi, Ashkenazi, and these are all ethnic communities. Each one of these countries and cities developed different minhagim. They developed different cultures of Judaism. They developed different tracks of halakha, following different hachamim. And if you just want to turn a few pages to see how this played out on the second page, this is a little not updated and not exact, but you just get an idea of Sephardi Jews, which this says the population is about 3.5 million, probably about 4 million now in the world, and where they reside in different countries. That exhaustive list. And pages 3 and 4 see Ashkenazi Jews, who are the vast majority of the Jewish people, and where they reside, and in different countries and the populations, etc. Hasidic Jewry, when did that come about? That wasn't born till about 300 years ago, in the early 18th century, the 1700s. Before you turn to page 5, we look at Hasidim. Oh, there's a Hasid. Oh, they do this. They have a custom. We speak about Hasidim in terms of a unit. Anyone have a guess as to how many different sects, S-E-C-T-S, of Hasidut there are? Any factions of Hasidut? Oh, the Hasidim. Well, if you look on pages 5 and 6 and 7, just in terms of dynasties, meaning the larger groups that have a descendancy and their leaders are dynasties, 37. You understand? 37. These all emanated. There's a nice chart here, tells you the founder was, where it emanated from all different places in Europe, in Eastern Europe. 37 is just dynasties. That doesn't include groupings that aren't dynasties, like the Breslov and others. There's probably about 45 main groups of Hasidut, and probably about 36 others that are much smaller movements. We're talking about 80 movements of Hasidut over here. Oh, the Hasidim, they do this. Oh, really? Yeah, they do this. It's like saying, oh, the males are this tall. Females are that. What are you talking about? Why am I painting you this picture? why are we talking about these divisions of the Jewish communities? Well, in one sense, you can say you get a picture of the scattered Jewish world and why we pray for kibbutz galuyot, the gathering of the exiles, the miracle of survival of Judaism, and of course, the miracle of modern day, where we see in our own eyes kibbutz galuyot, the gathering of exiles, Baruch Hashem, to Eretz Yisrael, that now houses more Jews than any single place in the world, the first time since the second Beit HaMikdash was destroyed, and also the communities of Iraq. That's nice. So it's tragic, it's nice, it's interesting, but that's not why I'm making this presentation to you of these factions. I'm getting to a question, a big question, a major question that behooves us to ask. And that's what that booklet was based on. So you can put that booklet aside now. If you have all these movements, if you have, and by the way, I want to throw on top of this what we call philosophical approaches. We've developed all these stereotypes nowadays, of course. Well, Hasidim have their own philosophical approaches, right? And each different sect of Hasidut has different philosophical approaches. Somewhat there are nuances that are different in each and every single group. What about the fact that within the divisions between Sephardim and Ashkenazim, classically very different philosophical approaches to life and what Torah life means, to halakha, to living a whole Torah life. There are different philosophies in terms of living more of enclosed communities like they did in Eastern Europe and more open communities integrated like the Sephardim did. How much do we integrate secular studies into our regular studies? How much do we have to separate and isolate versus being out there in the world? And of course, today, we have all these convenient little stigmatizing labels that can box everyone into any little box that you want to. And we use all types of labels like we say Haredim. The media and others love to use this ultra-Orthodox, as if there's two brands of Shulchan Aruch and there's more than 600 or less than 613 mitzvot. There's Orthodox and there's ultra-Orthodox. And there's modern people. People love using the modern term. This one's modern, progressive. And some of these are legitimate different philosophical approaches and movements. I'm being a little sarcastic in terms of the labels. So the labels are unfair and very damaging. I won't even bother with the terrible label that we develop in this community that I've expressed myself in past classes that I believe is absolutely asur for laymen or rabbis or leaders, anyone to use this black hat, white hat terminologies, which is false, inaccurate, unfair, divisive, and just completely prohibited in my view. But there are many different philosophical approaches in Judaism. So why this whole presentation of factions? Interesting, tragic, even hopeful. That's not why. The reason is we need to ask a few questions. How about who's right? Which one is correct? Well, one big happy family, they're all correct. I don't know about that. Is this the way it was planned? Is this the way it was meant to be? In halakha, we would call this b'di'avad. In other words, history had it that we became dispersed because of oppression and because of the difficulties we endured in different continents and countries over the centuries. We've had to migrate to different areas. We've had to develop different lifestyles for survival. Very reactionary. This is not the way it was meant to be. This was a fact, a reality of history. So really, which one of these developments is okay? Which is the one that's the ideal? Is it fair to ask that shouldn't some of these be consolidated? For goodness sake. I mean, 70, 80 types of Hasidut alone. Talking about hundreds of different factions in the Jewish people. Maybe some consolidation? And let's talk about, let's filter a little bit. Which ones it's time to go? Which ones to keep? Is it okay to think that maybe one or even many of these movements are wrong? And so wrong that those have been the ones that are holding back the Geulah in the times of Mashiach. Is that possible? Is that fair? It sounds fair. because it doesn't seem like this was all meant to be. And I think the answer to this question, even though it's a fair question, is going to be able to equip us with a way to handle the Jewish world and our lifetimes in the 21st century in a manner that can transform us and really do what we need to do to bring the redemption. So the way we're going to start this answer is we're going to talk about what's called the tribes. The tribe, the Shivatim. We know Yaakov Avinu had 12 children. Later on, Levi was decided not to be a tribe, and Yosef split into two. So you got 12 again. And let's talk about, what did God want with the tribes? Why did HaKadosh Baruch Hu create Shivatim? What was he thinking? If really you think about it for a moment, it seems like, God forbid to say, but some flaws in that system. I was approached by a young man 2 Shabbatot ago after we read the double parasha Matot to Mas'eh. And we read in Mas'eh how Benot, the daughters of Zelophehad, who didn't have any brothers, so Moshe Rabbeinu al pi Hashem gave inheritance to the girls, which is not the normal protocol. But there was a complaint by some of the other tribes to Moshe Rabbeinu that if we allow the daughters of Zelophehad to marry out, what's going to happen out of this tribe, what's going to happen is that then the portion that they have will end up being transferred to the other tribe, and the other tribe will enlarge its land and will shrink. And Moshe Rabbeinu consulted God and said, you're right, they must marry with him. Keep to your tribe. That was the mandate, the divine mandate. And this young man asked me, doesn't that seem a little divisive? Isn't that promoting division and different factions and separateness among Am Yisrael? He was bothered by that. So I'm not going to give you the answer I gave him yet. But I'm going to say that the truth is he seems to have a point. So it's really incumbent upon us to understand the natural original division of Am Yisrael and what God wanted. What was his plan? And indeed, during the times of Shoftim, in our first 4 centuries in Eretz Yisrael, there were some disastrous results of this tribe structure of Am Yisrael. From the infighting that occurred in Shevet Ephraim, the times of Yiftach HaShofet, from the time when Shevet Dan, the tribe of Dan, went rogue basically, to the terrible debacle of Pelegesh Begiva'ah, the tribe of Binyamin, and how there was a war of tribes against tribes and slaughter of tens of thousands of Jews in the hands of other Jews. And during the times of the kings, it got even worse. No sooner did the kingdom of David HaMelech and Shlomo HaMelech end, and there was actually a split in kingdoms. Malchut Yehuda, Malchut Yisrael, the 2 and the 10 tribes. And we had the most tragic episodes during those centuries. We had civil wars. We had Jewish blood spilled by Jews, seemingly all because of this breakup and divisions of tribes. It didn't seem to go well. And that really exacerbates the question as to what and how was this meant to be by God. And so we're going to look at source number 3 on the bottom of page 1. This is based on a pasuk in the Parasha B'Midbar, where there was a description in the desert how the different tribes had a formation around the Aron, north, west, south, east, right? And they each had a banner that stood for their tribe. There was possibly an insignia and a color, different theories. And the pasuk says in second perek in Parashat B'Midbar, the book of B'Midbar, Ish al deglo be'otot lebet abotam. Each tribe leader had the banner, had the sign. Some say each family had their own mini banner. And the Midrash in B'Midbar Rabbah analyzes this pasuk. Ish al deglo be'otot, and quotes a pasuk from Shir HaShirim that we know so well, read it every Friday night. Mizot hanishkafa kemoshachar, which means, who is this that is peering down like a star, like a light? And on that pasuk, the Midrash says, that the Jewish nation and their tribes were so great and so holy and so prestigious with their formation of tribes and their banners and their flags. And all the nations were looking at them in shock. And they were saying, who's looking like the star and the light? And the third line continues along the Pesukim and Shir HaShirim, as if there's a exchange and a conversation going back and forth. The nations will tell us, as they saw us in this formation, Shubi, Shubi, right? Shubi, Shubi, Ashulami. Come back, you whole one. Hidbakulanu, cling to us, Eslenu, and we'll make you great. We'll make you prestigious. We'll give you distinction. Come to us, say the nations in seeming jealousy. Shubi, Shubi, v'nehazeba. Come back to us and let us look at you. And this is Shirara, this is power. We'll give you power. We'll give you distinction, say the other nations. What does Yisrael answer? The next pasuk in Shir HaShirim. Yisrael omer, ma tehazu b'shulamid. What could you possibly show us? The Shulamid is now a sort of a code name for Yisrael. What Gedolah, what greatness are you referring to? Can you possibly give us? Can you give us like the encampment? And it could mean the dancing of the camps, but it's really referring to the formation. Can you possibly offer us something that is greater than the formation of the tribes and the identification of the banners and the flags in the desert? You can't possibly give us anything greater than we have. So all of a sudden, in this first source, it opens the doors to the concept of tribes and Shivatim, and that is a source of pride and prestige for Am Yisrael and a source of jealousy by the collective world. If you look in source 4, we turn to page 2, we see that there's really an incredible fundamental idea that comes from this, because going chronological order in Parashat Naso, the next parasha, we know that when the Beit HaMikdash was opened, the leaders of every tribe, after it was inaugurated, came with their own, the Nasi'im, the presidents, the leaders. We read this in the first days of Hanukkah, of course. Came with their presents. They were all identical presents and donations and contributions to the Mishkan and to the Kohanim and the Leviim. And they were identical. And they all brought them at the same time. And Hashem commanded Moshe Rabbeinu a very unusual command. He told him in the Pasuk, the Midbar Perek Zayin, Pasuk Yud Aleph Parashat Naso, V'yomer Adonai al Moshe, Nasi Ehad Layom, Nasi Ehad Layom Ne'akrivu Korbanam. I want every leader to bring and offer their korbanot and their gifts on separate days. And this dragged out for 12 days. They're identical, and yet they each had to have their own. And look at what Rabbi Hirsch has to say about this. It's profound. He says they brought it all together at the same time, proving thereby the equality of unanimity of feelings towards the sanctuary of Torah. They all brought their gifts at the same time. It's a great gesture of unity and showing that they all felt the same about the Mishkan, about Torah, about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, of all the tribes they represented. But God gave orders for the princes that each tribe represented by its prince was to have a separate day allotted for bringing its offering. Why? Says Rabbi Hirsch. Listen to this. For each tribe represented a special kind of social activity. And it being purified and being penetrated with the spirit of Torah and using its activities to make the demands of the Torah reality, formed a completely essential, specialized contribution for accomplishing the common mission of the nation, i.e., that's in sophisticated terminology. What Rabbi Hirsch is telling us follows. Rabbi Hirsch is telling us that this formation, this division, this concept of tribes was in order to reflect and identify the reality that each tribe had its own unique approach. Each tribe had different skills and special abilities that it brought to the table. Each tribe had a different angle. And I don't want that to be lost. I want the individuality of each tribe to get its own presentation of its own day. And yet, they're all the same. I want them to be able to combine the unique angles and talents and individuality and combine them into one. Incredible thought. Incredible thought. Am Yisrael becomes one, not because we're robotic and identical, but because in our differences, we have the same fundamental beliefs. But there are differences. We respect and we cherish those differences. That is why, says Rabbi Hirsch, God commanded them every single day to be an individual celebration of each and every tribe. And then you see the perspective of the Goyim on that. And we go in chronological order in Parashat Balak that we read a number of weeks ago, that when Bilam, in his final presentation, in his final monologue, you can say, and Balak was getting sick and tired of Bilam by this time, and Bilam was just giving up on what Balak wanted him to do. He saw that God rather bless Yisrael. It says, V'yisai Bilam et einav. He looked up and he saw them. How did he see Am Yisrael? Vayar Yisrael shochen lishbatav. He saw them encamped by their tribes, and then Vatihi alav ruach Elohim. And then he was overwhelmed with the spirit of godliness. And explains the Orah Hayim that he saw two things, two great things about Am Yisrael at this point. First, that every tribe was an individual, specialized tribe. And second of all, that the Shekhinah, the divine presence of God, rested upon all of them as one. And yet they were separate. As he says in the last line, every single tribe has its level, has its uniqueness, has its individuality. And that didn't stop them from being united in God resting a Shekhinah over them. The perspective of Bilam, who represented all of the Gentile nations, their prophet. And then finally we see great praise in this idea. In Tehillim, chapter 122, where we read on this on the holidays, and you see Shira Ma'alot, Samachti Omri Mi Bet Adonai Lelech, Omdot Hayudach Lena, we were standing, reflects the David HaMelech in Yerushalayim. And he calls Yerushalayim Pasuk Gimal, Ki'er Shehuber Ala Yahdav. It's the city that was combining, it was a unifying city, but the Pasuk Dalet says Shisham Alu Shevatim, because there the Shevatim came up. It's a unifying city, although we went aliyah, we migrated and made our pilgrimages to Yerushalayim as separate tribes, and yet we're one. And the Malbim explains that Yerushalayim is what created us to be a guf echad. Even though we're all each separate tribes of God, Yerushalayim unifies us. And what you get from all of these sources, what we clearly are able to crystallize now about Shevatim, about tribes, about the intention of God, about the concept of tribes, is that the intended structure and the ultimate status of Am Yisrael is just that, is different factions, is different divisions of peoples. Because Hashem recognizes individuality and uniqueness of different descendants of different factions, and how they have their different angle and their different skill, different perspective that they bring at the table, while at the same time the Torah promotes and maintains the unity among them and the tolerance between them. At the same time, the Torah pursues the harmonious existence of Am Yisrael, even though they are tribes. Now, tragically, we blew it. We basically failed God in that intended structure and that status. And that's how things rolled out of control in the time of the Shoftim, and even worse in the time of kings, and brought out ultimate exile. But that was the intended purpose. And so we can talk now about that handout I gave you, about all the different sects of Judaism, the denominations, the factions, all the different ethnic communities, all the different approaches and philosophies. Those are what we can call, my friends, today's tribes. Today's tribes, because little did we know when we were thrust into exile that framework of Shevatim, that breakup, that concept of having different factions and yet being unified, that really planted the foundation of Jewish survival. That's how we were able to survive. It was inevitable and was meant to be. Jews are so resourceful. Jews are so unique. They're the most resilient people on earth. And our creativity and our independence and our resourcefulness basically was simply applied to every single setting that we found ourselves in. We found ourselves in a different century, in a different country, in a different setting. All the factions that we listed, all the divisions of Judaism that we identified, those are our modern day Shevatim. It's our survival as Shevatim, as separate, individual, beautiful, unique factions of Judaism. They are our tribes. And so you ask, who's right? Which division, which faction, which segment, which denomination is correct? I say, who cares? Who cares? For goodness sake, we're still here. We survived. We did it. We did exactly what was expected of us. We survived in every single environment that we were thrust into, and the Torah survived with us. We clung to the Torah to every single diverse country and environment throughout the centuries. We applied the Torah. We reapplied the Torah the best that we possibly could. The way Am Yisrael looks right now is simply our reaction to Galut, to the exile, to the centuries of suffering. And the result is that we have hundreds of beautiful tribes in Am Yisrael, each unique, each bringing a different angle to the table, a different perspective, each with a different culture, different customs, and yes, different philosophical approaches of Torah, and there's room for it all. There's room for it all. There's room to argue. There's room to stick up for your own perspective and way of thinking and philosophy, and that's fine. Build your constituency, but know that you can't be the only one. This was the inevitable consequence of these centuries of exile. We survived as unbelievably beautiful tribes. And the question that we have to ask ourselves is that, how do we return to the ultimate status? Because the ultimate status is that there's incredible harmony among these tribes. So how do we possibly get back there? It's the critical question that we have to ask ourselves. And I'll tell you that we have only a couple of sources to go on page 3. The Kata Kemach, Rabbeinu Bachya, in his work of philosophy, really, he hits the modern day tribal challenge, we'll call it, right on the nose. He hits it right on the nose. After going through his definition of Sinat Hanam, about hating or disliking another Jew without a justifiable claim, he calls it a sickness and the worst of all averot. See the last 3 lines there? Look at this profound definition. He says, Sinat Hanam hu haluk levavot. It's the different ways of thinking. We all have different ways of thinking. There's no way we can be the same. But the problem is that we don't give enough of recognition to the different way of thinking, enough honor, enough respect. We all want to be the main movement. We all want to be validated. We all want history to vindicate us. We all want to show that we're victorious somehow. That, he says, is his description. That's not Hanam, but it's really his description of the consequence of the exiles and our tribal existence. It's a problem. It's a major problem. And you see that people nowadays, you hear people, you hear many Jews, you hear most Jews possibly, observe different groups. These people, they're so annoying. They're so annoying, right? And we say, oh, these Hasidim, they have to be so different. They have to be so different. They have to look so different. They're embarrassing me already. Another group says about that group, oh, these yeshiva guys, they're working, they're burdened, and then they're saying this, oh, they're modern. Do we need to modernize the Torah? They're so modern. Everyone is just thinking from their own perspective that I have the ultimate angle on Torah. I have a monopoly on this. No, you don't. There are hundreds of angles going on over here. They're all a consequence of history. And they're all okay. It's even okay for you not to agree with them. You agree to disagree. You can think they're wrong. You can argue against them. But be shocked in such a positive way. Look upon them with such admiration, with such pride. They survived. These are our tribes. Don't be upset. Don't find fault. How about, look at us. Is this amazing? Is this amazing after thousands of years? It's incredible. Are we proud enough? Why aren't we proud of the 37 different types of Hasidic dynasties? Why? Be proud of them. We don't have to be like them. We don't have to agree with them. Why can't we be proud of different ethnic groups with different, we look at as unusual customs and annoying sometimes and culture they created? Why? That was their reaction to Galut. That was their survival. That's the way their tribe developed. It's beautiful. It's unbelievable. Think of this. How many great Hachamim were produced from each movement? How many righteous people and individuals contributed to Am Yisrael from each faction? How many greats emerged over the centuries from Am Yisrael? Not from one single group, my friends, from dozens, from hundreds of groups. Think about that. Add that all up. That's the fiber of Am Yisrael. That's the meat of Am Yisrael. That's the fabric that keeps us surviving. That greatness. How many people from each sect over the centuries in different countries sacrificed for the team to keep the ball rolling? Be thankful to each sect. Be thankful to each one. I know that there is an idea this philosophy is wrong, not meant to be. It's even okay to think that. It's even okay to think that. But how about being proud of the fact that that's their way of embracing Torah in this world? How do we be proud of the fact that they're still embracing Torah in this world? And they're still among us. And what separates us is only a couple of percentage points. And we're 95 or 98% the same anyway. How about thinking in terms of that? I want to look at one last source, and with that, we'll end the class, and with a few final thoughts. I'll jump through it a little bit. It's on the next page, and it's from the great book called Shemirat HaLashon of the Rabbi Yisrael Meir HaKohen Kagan, who's known as the Hafez Chaim, but this is not from his book, the Hafez Chaim. And you see on the front page in the left column, there's an arrow there. That's where I'll start reading. I'll go through it somewhat quickly and jump around. But he says as follows. I'm in the middle of a discussion where he wants to talk about learning zechut on Am Yisrael. Because in the call, I'm sorry, because in Nukhal Ort, it Godel has a hiduch Srich Kol Adam Lizahed Benafsho Nelamed Habal Kal Yisrael. How careful we have to be in giving what's the opposite of the benefit of the doubt to Am Yisrael, to looking upon them negatively. Adraba, the opposite, he says, quite the contrary. Yergil asmo tamil le'orera hamim laskir zechutam. Make it a habit to find the great things about Am Yisrael, to have compassion for them. That's the way to make ourselves beloved. If you look down to that bottom paragraph in the bottom of the page, some places in the book, Tana Debe Eliyahu, traditionally authored by Eliyahu and Rabbi, he found ways to find favor and positivity in Am Yisrael. For instance, God of the universe, look at our suffering. Look what's happening to us at every moment. Look at our difficulties we're enduring. How many individuals don't even have enough to support themselves and they're still involved in Torah b'chol yom tamid? How many impoverished people we have? And even them, they kill themselves literally to keep it going and commit to Torah in this world. How much youth do we have, boys and girls? They don't even know what they're learning, but they're still clinging on to Torah. How many elderly people they wake up every morning to Bet Knesset and the Bet Midrash and wait for your salvation, God. Remember all these people. Look at all these people. This is the cumulative Am Yisrael. These are our people. These people are included in every faction, in every single division. You can find them everywhere, from old to young. This is just within the 17, that's so-called % of observant Judaism. It's all there. They're all brothers. I have to say this. I hear all the time, people, rabbis call for unity. Havat Hinam. Really, do I hear how that's supposed to play out? How is that supposed to look in reality? Give me an example with real people. I'm giving you an example for real people. The different philosophies. Look at our community. Don't use the black-white hat curse. Don't use that terminology. But look at people, different synagogues, different schools. Can you find zichut? Can you look at the positive in them? Can you look at the unique angle and the unbelievable productivity each one of them? You can't? You kidding me? These are the tribes of Am Yisrael. Look at the Ashkenazim, look at the Hasidim, look at the Haredim, look at the Mar, look at this. They're all great. You don't have to agree. There's such beauty in them. This is the survival of the tribes of Israel over centuries. We're still here. You know, I came back from Israel a couple of weeks ago, a week or so ago. And, you know, Israeli politics is disgusting. I know a lot about Israeli politics. And it's terrible, really. It's just terrible. The hatred that you see. And by the way, how do you know that they're all wrong? How do you know that every single politician is wrong? Every single one. I don't care if you love Likud, you love Yemen, you love Labor. How do you know every guy is wrong? How do you know that? You know how you know? Is the proof that every single one is wrong? You never heard ever on the Knesset floor one stand up and said, I made a mistake or I'm wrong. And unless God has imported some type of pristine, perfect human beings from a different species to become part of the Knesset, it's impossible for a human being never to be wrong. And you've never heard one of them say, I am wrong. So it is disgusting. That's not why I'm bringing up this point. I bring up this point for the opposite. There's a beautiful phenomenon, by and large, in Eretz Yisrael. And that is, even though there certainly does exist a lot of friction, especially between secular and some of the other groups, both sides and both are wrong, it exists. But by and large, you can have Jews with different kippot, from different factions, and different levels of religion, congregating together in a minyan, tolerating each other, hugging each other, calling each other brother, ahi. That really exists. It must be the Kiddusha of Eretz Yisrael that's doing that. It must be the miracle of Kibbutz Galuyot that's doing that. That really is happening today. It really, really is. There's nothing more beautiful than that. That is something that's our paradigm. That's our model. Us, the surviving tribes of Galut, the survivors, the different factions of exile. That is our model. The beautiful ability to coexist, to call someone else ahi, my brother, my sister. I'll end with a story that is said accurately by a businessman. Many stories about the Rabbi Schneerson, alav shalom. And so many people went to him about their projects they started. So a story about a businessman that went to him, see where he came from. I don't have the exact place. But in any case, he went and told the Rebbe that he arranged in a certain shul services in a neighborhood that's a remote place for 130 Jews that have no Jewish background. He wanted the Rebbe to be so impressed. And the Rebbe, he relates, his smile vanished. The Rebbe had this constant smile on his face. It vanished. And he said, he looked at him with his piercing eyes, from the pictures, his piercing eyes. He said, could you repeat that again? And so he repeated it, maybe he said it in a different way. Yeah, minyan for Jews, 130 Jews with no Jewish background. And he looked at me, he said, as if I just insulted his children. No Jewish background, said the Rebbe. He looked at me and he said, go back to them right now and tell them you all have a background. You're the children of Abraham, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. That's your background. There's no such thing as a Jew without a background, he says. It sounds nice, it sounds fluffy, but it's true. It's the reality of Tisha B'Av. It's time really to take the productive steps, to eradicate this mahala, this disease called Sinat Hanan. It's time to be honest. It's time to start looking at the factions and the different philosophies and the people that we differ from in a different light. It's the only way we're going to turn this thing around. Today, it has to start today. You have to tell people about this. It has to start today. Stop it already. There's not one single right group or one single right person. After 120 Mashiach, you'll have plenty of truths revealed. But for now, love the tribes. Embrace the factions. Look at them, our brothers. And the people, small segment, the less than 20% of people committed to Torah and Mitzvot, have to find a way to unify, have to find a way to transform this day once and for all, from a day of tragedy to a day of holiday, to a day of redemption, to a day that B'ezrat Hashem will be the cause and the trigger to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu B'Yonah B'Yameinu. Amen.
Yeah,